Here with Peter Doulman, who's come in to have a chat with us on Garry's podcast. And Garry, I guess take it away.
Well, actually, a lot of people don't know, but we actually sort of resided about 100 metres from each other for quite a while when we were kids, so even though we didn't know each other then.
Yeah, literally. And I guess the other bit that's probably more strange is I knew your dad.
Yeah.
But Jimmy was this legendary bloke who used to fix motorcycles that all us sort of teenage kids were in awe of because he could fix anything. So, yeah, he used to always be around, not always, but often around there, sort of checking out all these little tricks and stuff he did to fix them.
There used to be this kid that came in, he'd sit on a milk crate and not say a word.
Yeah.
That's my father describes it to me. Not say a word. He'd stay there for a couple of hours and then wander off home. And he only lived around the corner.
Yeah, and it was literally probably 100 metres.
Do you put the invoice in at the end of the week for hours in the workshop? Just
no, and in fact, you know, I suppose truth be known, I probably sat there the whole time not saying anything because I was trying to work out how I could get my hands on one of these motorcycles.
We used to buy old bikes, do them up and then sell them again.
Sell them off.
As a part-time thing because he was working at the same time.
So was that what led to you getting into motorsport, or was it a family interest from the beginning? Or
well, probably all of the above to some degree. And I was just thinking, as you said that, as time went on and I got a bit older, you know, and I'm, you know, early teens, I suppose, we that used to then buy motorcycles ourselves and cut them up and hot rod them and do all sorts of terrible things to them. And now I look back at some of the motorcycles I owned during that era that would be now worth a fortune.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to tell people what we did to them, you know, but they're nearly always old British motorcycles, but they were road bikes. So the first thing we had to do was turn them into scramblers, which meant, you know, you're changing the tyres and chucking all the guards away or cutting the guards off or, you know, doing something. And, of course, you weren't allowed to have one with a muffler.
No.
loud as possible.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a lot of my dad's stuff was Triumphs, Thunderbirds, Tiger T10s, whatever. A couple of Harleys, I think, went through there. Early ones, Royal Enfields, BSAs, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
so did you race them against each other and stuff, or
did we race
them against each other? Yeah.
No, in fact, I grew up on a property, so you know, we had ag bikes and stuff like that, and I realised when I got to probably about 16 that I was highly allergic to gravel rash. We never wore helmets, and in summer we would ride the bikes around the property, you know, just in our boots, shorts, half the time no shirts, but if we had a shirt on, it was a T-shirt.
Yeah.
And if you threw it up the road, it was very ugly, and I certainly had a couple of trips to hospital where, and I don't know whether they used to do this as punishment or it was a real medical procedure, but they used to get like a Dettol or iodine water and a nail brush, and they'd scrub the gravel out of you know, to get it clean. and I always wondered whether it was their way of trying to teach you that, you know, you should be more careful. But I did become allergic to it. That's true.
I don't think I could handle that.
I still got some here from coming off motorbikes.
Yeah.
But I wore thongs when I rode.
Well,
silly me.
We did, just speaking of the bikes, but just to, there used to be an event, you asked if I raced, the only event I ever raced in on a motorcycle was a thing that a guy in Bathurst by the name of Sos Goddard and his son Bruce used to run, and it was called the Hardly Ferocious. And it was run on their property out near Rockley somewhere from memory.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the exact rules, but I think it ran for the same time period as the Hardy Ferodo in the day. Yeah. So 7 or 8 hours. And you had one motorcycle and multiple riders.
Yeah, okay.
So I competed in that event once on a 185 ag bike with 3 of my mates. And I think it was probably of the order of about a 6K track just around his property. And, this poor old motorcycle, because you'd just come back into the pits, you know, keep it running, fuel it up, and the next bloke would take off, and the poor thing was just thrashed for, 7 or 8 hours. It was unbelievable.
We're doing good time.
So how'd you go?
I fell off twice.
Did you get a
not
place?
Too allergic to the gravel rash then.
I can't even remember, Gary.
A long time ago.
A long time, yeah. It's probably only, I don't know, 15 or something.
So what sparked, when did you sort of start getting involved in motor racing?
Well, I joined the Bathurst Light Car Club when I was, I think, 12. At the time, I recall it was a bit of a funny situation because I was the youngest ever member they had. And the reason I joined that was that my brother Mark, he was very much into, or started getting into that club motorsport, hill climbs, the motor carners and the flying 1/8s and all that. And I guess I was just the little kid who liked cars who tagged along with the big brother, you know.
Yeah.
Been a good time. Must have been different around the mountain then.
Because like car club was still where it is now.
I was going to say, but they always ran their events on the mountain, didn't they?
Yeah,
Like
my dad was a founding member of the Light Car Club.
There you go. Yeah, which I never knew.
52, I think.
Yeah,
somewhere around there.
It was around there. Not all the events were run. So the Flying 1/8 was run on Conrod Strait, which basically started at Forest Elbow and went down. And that was back before the chase.
Yeah.
And, you know, I can recall cars doing 140, like GT Falcons.
Yeah.
There was one guy had a GT Falcon, I think that was supercharged, that did 142 miles an hour or something, you know, which is just nuts. But they used to run a motor carners in, what's the name of the park? Harris Park.
Yeah.
And that's where I started because back then there was a bit of a loophole where you could run in motor carners if you're underage. And what I mean by underage is that back then you couldn't run in any speed events unless you had a road licence.
Okay. Yep.
So that's not to say that I may not have, because by the time I'd got to about 15 and I'd been there for 3 or 4 years, they'd worked out that I probably wasn't a liability. So there are a number of hill climbs and other things where there were a lot of people looking the other direction to start.
Now they're trying to encourage people around 16 to get involved.
And I was so lucky, you know, because my brother Mark, he had an SLR 5000. He had a improved production, I think it was called Mini Cooper S, at different times, and one of the limited edition Bathurst XU1s. And God forbid, you know, he thought she'd ever do it, but he'd go and have a run and come back and say, all right, you better jump in over Lash. And, you know, I was flogging his XU1 backwards up the S's at Bathurst when I was 16, you know, so bit lucky.
Yeah, that's a good effort.
Yeah, a number of people that used to go up there and practice during the week, knowing there was a hill climb coming up on the weekend, and you know, middle of the night, go for a flog up through the S's to get some practice in.
It still happens now.
Yeah, I think so. But unfortunately, a guy I went to school with did that on a bike, and unfortunately, there was something coming down over the skyline and had a head on and got killed as a result. Wasn't nice, but anyway, so you moved on and from Bathurst and from club stuff there to...
Yeah. Well, I moved to Sydney because I went to university.
Yep.
Although I think I spent more time in Bathurst than I did in Sydney while I was at uni. It probably, truth be known, I was more homesick than anything else. And Bathurst wasn't like it is now. It wasn't, you know, a couple of hours up the road on the M4. You know, it was all... old-fashioned highway.
Yeah, 40 bends, you know, and all that at this side of Lithgow. And
I had a Mini that was wasn't a Cooper S, but it was a hot rod, you know, had a Weber on it and everything else you could find. You know, and driving at 11/10ths, it was still the best part of 3 hours, you know. So it was a fair old drag up there, but having said that, I kind of, you know, basically did Bathurst, Sydney every week.
Yeah, well...
back in those days, so it still had a lot to do with the Light Car Club, and but then, I don't know, probably after I'd been at uni for about 2 or 3 years, a good mate of mine, Paul Smith, and I bought a mini sports sedan off a chap down here in Sydney. Can't remember what it was, but I mean, it had a John Leffler 1370 engine in it, and we used to keep that in Bathurst. and Paul Smith his name is, and Paul used to look after it up there, and go home on the weekends, and then we'd chuck it on the trailer on the back of his old man's ute, and then back to Warren Park, and then back to Bathurst, and then back to Sydney on Monday morning. So
in those days at Oran Park, you're running in closed sports, I suppose. It'll be a bit later that sports sedans in the 70s. We're talking, aren't we?
Yeah, mainly club events.
Yep.
Can't remember, probably, not even sure what club it was, but
road racing club.
Road racing club, more lap dashes and things like that.
There was the other one that used to do stuff, Street Sedan Association, which became Production Touring, I think, and then there was the mob that used to race out of Amaroo a fair bit.
AARC?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so that would have been about 77, I'm guessing, but I never actually raced the Mini in a race. It was all like lap dashes and hill climbs and sprints and all that kind of thing.
Okay.
I did get my CAMS licence, like circuit licence, in that car, so I didn't know LT in it. And then after that, I moved on to an RX2, which I bought off Phil Alexander, and it was a cool car. It was everything ripped out of it, and I think it had close ratio box in it and a 12A off the top of my head. But it was a good car, and I raced that for probably 2 or 3 years, and never missed a beat, and pranged it once. I pranged it once, and interesting story for you. There was a guy, George, and I was living in Balmain at the time, and a guy, George, in Balmain, who had a panel shop called, which escapes me right at this second, Javelin Motors. Mm-hmm. And George was Czech, a nice bloke, and he used to always help me out with a bit of panel beating and stuff. And after I shunted it and took the radiator out and both front guards, the bonnet and the grille, it wasn't a major repair, but and it was all road car stuff. I took it down to George, and he said, no problem, Peter, in his very Czech accent. He said, I've got this young kid here. He's just come out from Czechoslovakia, and I'll get him to work on it, and you can help him.
You're right.
And you can help him, and between the two of you can fix the car.
Yeah.
And we did. And this young kid who had very ordinary English, but we managed to communicate, and he kept telling me that in Czechoslovakia he raced Skoda.
Yeah.
He raced Skoda. It was very good.
I know who you're talking about.
I can see where it's heading.
And anyway, I took this kid to the races, and he loved it and all the rest of it. And his name was Thomas Mezzera.
Mezzera,
Mezzera, that's his proper,
Mezzera, yeah.
that's his proper pronunciation.
So I remember once in early 2000s, we were doing something at Calder, and Thomas come over, and one of the guys, I can't remember who it was, said, Thomas, do you know Peter? And, Jesus Christ, I've not Peter for all so many years.
So Thomas, he would have been early on then, because I know that he quickly got into Formula Ford.
It was before he bought his Formula Ford.
Oh, really? Okay.
So,
he was working as a chef, wasn't he, as well, at that time?
No. At the time when I think it, and I'd have to ask Tom, but I think he'd literally just arrived. Right. And I think there might, I don't know if there's a family connection with George, or George was helping people at that stage who'd got
to get
away.
Out from Eastern Bloc countries.
Yeah. And he was just doing the right thing. And I think, I don't think he had any job. I think he basically was just helping George out to make ends meet. But of course, then the bug hit, and off he went, yeah.
I was going to say, he sat in the shed in the corner a little bit better than you did. He got off the chair and started talking.
So, funny story.
So did you guys, because your story, I don't believe, you didn't go through Formula Ford, did you? So
no.
He went Formula Ford and started forging a career. You went sports sedans and club racing, as opposed to that.
Yeah, so that was before I'd even started Doulman Automotive. So, it was still all, doing your own stuff in the backyard. And then I sold the RX2 and bought my first Formula 2 car.
Yeah.
And then I started running that in club and state championships.
That would have been in the 80s.
I think I bought, it was the Avanti.
Yep.
I think I bought that in about 1980.
Yep. I remember you racing that car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and actually at that time I was still at uni.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was at uni part-time, working full-time job, you know, all the usual stuff.
Yeah.
And racing out on the weekends, which was a nice car. I don't need any more race cars, but if somebody forced me to have another race car, I'd have that car.
Yeah.
Where's it now?
Chap in Wollongong's got it, last I heard, and he'd done a reasonably good resto on it from what I'd seen in the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not in the original colours, which is a bit disappointing, but that's easy to fix.
Yeah. So what was the notable, like, standout results in that car? What did you get up to majorly in it?
Well, I run in New South Wales State Championship in
Yep.
Formula Libre, I think it was called, because it was mostly Formula 2 cars.
Yep.
But I think it was actually called Formula Libre.
Yeah.
And probably the most bizarre and strange result with that car is that I still hold the short circuit lap record
At
for
Oran Park.
Formula Libre at Oran Park in it.
Yeah.
Well, it's
right.
not going to be broken. Unless someone
No.
can get around the streets pretty
yeah,
quick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Which is not... I mean, there are cars that were quicker, such as Formula Holden and even Formula 2. But because in those days it fitted into a category called Formula Libre, it's still there, yeah.
Yeah. Still impressive task. Like, and those things are pretty quick still as well. Like, you know.
Yeah, it was such
Yeah.
a cool car to drive.
Yeah,
It was...
yeah.
It was very, very light compared with the other cars, so you had to get out of bed pretty early to beat me to the first corner.
What was it powered by?
When I first got it, because I actually bought the car off Doug Clark, and John Wright, the guy who built the Avantis, was a very clever guy, and it was built for Brian Hilton, I think, for John Burke to drive. But they never drove it. I think they did one test day. So actually, when I got the car, it had never raced. It was brand
So
spanking.
Toyota powered, was it?
No, it was Renault Gordini powered, because Clark Hilton, whatever they were in those days, or Brian Hilton, were also a Renault dealer.
Ah, so I knew they had
Yeah.
Toyota.
So they'd spent quite a bit of money, I think, getting this very trick
Yep.
Gordini engine out of Europe.
Yeah.
We couldn't make it run. It just kept blowing pistons out block and all sorts of... It's probably, truth be known now, it's a very expensive engine to own, but in the end I just got sick of that, and I went over to Bob Holden and said, Bob, I need something that looks like a Formula 2 engine, and that's where we started. And then I purchased, strangely enough, my current Formula 2 car, if that's the right word, which is the Hardman. It had a Ford in it when it won the championship in 1980 with Richard Davidson, and for some strange reason the guy pulled the Ford out of that, and I ended up buying the Ford and put that in the Avanti. And now here we are a zillion years later, where I now actually own the other car that engine come from back in the day.
Yeah.
So what's the Hardman got in it now?
Hardman's got a Golf in it.
Ah, yeah.
So, and I've started restoring it, but it's a catch-22 on the restoration, because I can restore it to where I started with it, which is sort of 1990.
Yeah.
Or I can go back to the 1980 championship winning car, which is probably would be the smarter way to go, but it's a massive restoration because the 1980 car was a ground effects car. And then, because they banned ground effects, so all that was ripped off and binned.
Course, yeah.
So it's
So
now
who
got
drove it back in 1980?
Richard Davidson.
Oh, yeah, but who drove it later on?
Oh, so
Was it David Stone?
no, Swain.
Swanky.
Swain.
SCHWENKE, was it? No?
No.
Ah, yeah, I know.
SWAIN.
Yeah, okay.
So John Swain owned it, and Stevie's son drove it.
Yep.
They, I believe, they crashed the original car at Oran Park. So then they took it home and decided to do a major rebuild on it, and they changed the front suspension from outboard to inboard, so there's a major change there. But they also hooked up with Holden and got sponsorship, and they ran a Chimera engine in it.
Which is a Toyota engine. Basically,
Which
isn't it?
they probably completed some races, but I don't ever remember one because it was just
I remember
unreliable.
the Hardman racing, but it was probably in that later era where it wasn't doing a lot.
And would have the compact
Yeah.
welders on the side. I think they just got fed up to the back teeth with that and purchased a brand new Judd VW Golf out of the UK. And it wasn't long, and they didn't race it for very long after that. I'm not sure why, but and again, in relation to Grant, a very funny story. John Swain, because of the Bathurst Orange connection, and nice fella, was continually at me. You know, come buy me car. Let's race it. Come buy me car. You know, let's. It's like, mate, I've just got into this BMW gig. You know, I'm now racing. Blah blah blah. I haven't got time. I haven't got money. All the rest of it. He convinced me to come up to Orange, to his very nice property he had up there, and have a barbecue with him. And I took Grant, who was 5, 6, and another mate of mine who looked after the car, Wayne Lee. And we had a lovely afternoon and, you know, a few beers and a barbecue and, you know, the brilliant hosts. And Grant and John had disappeared into the garage looking at racing car bits and, you know, all the rest of it and what have you. And Grant comes back to me and he says, "Hey, Dad, have I got a deal for you?" And it's like, "Have you now?" This is like this big, right? No, a bit bigger now, isn't he?
Just slightly.
And he goes, "Mr. Swain has just given me his whole race team for free. The car, the trailer,
You just
everything."
have to buy it.
And it's like, "Seriously?" He goes, "Yep, there's just one deal." And I said, "What's the deal?" He goes, "You're going to buy the engine off him." So, yeah, look, in the end, it was one of those deals where you couldn't refuse, where John basically said, "This is a brand new engine, it's done 100 kilometres.
He wanted to get out, basically.
He wanted to get out, but he also desperately wanted the car to race.
Yeah.
Because it was his baby. And yeah, so there's still a bit of dispute over ownership of that car, which I should say, according to the logbook, I last raced in 1995.
Yep.
So I guess when I fall off my perch, the ownership won't be a problem. It'll just go back to Grant.
Yeah. So you've moved on from the Avanti to, was that when you looked at the Shrike?
No. There's a whole bit in the middle I missed there. So while I had the Avanti, I then started racing production cars. We started out in that series called Commodore Classic that Oran Park run.
Yes, yep.
Which were ex-VK
well, they were actually
patrol cars.
They were, but some of them were actually racing in the production car series, as long as they didn't run the CSA wheels or the Yokohama tyres or that little bib spoiler they had on the back of them.
And we actually did that. We ran in the Winton 300.
So it was probably worth noting that in that Commodore Classic series, there was like Melrose, Ian Luff, Ken Davison, Ian Gagan.
Yes, Gossie had a run.
Yep.
The chap who was the Speedway guy from Tasmania, his name escapes me also.
I know who you mean, but I can't remember his name either, yeah.
2 Yuldens.
Yes, both of them.
Both the Yulden brothers.
It's Kent and Brett. It was a quality class field.
Yeah, Gibbsy.
Yeah, Mark Gibbs. He was usually winning, wasn't he?
Yeah, Barry Jones.
There
was a few doers in it.
Yeah.
So we ran in that series. Steve Williams, of course, in the first year, and then in the second year they pulled some of the fiberglass off because it was just getting too expensive.
Yeah, there was a fair few accidents happening out there.
Yeah. The first race, we cut and shut the back off the car. So that was a big day out for the first race meeting. Cut it through the black.
Why did we do this?
I just got shuttered in the first corner on the first lap in the first race, And, you know, I got spun and then somebody just taken the whole back off the car. There was, you know, destroyed it. Because they're just a road car, you know.
Yeah.
So that was a bad start.
I'm just trying to get that class of Commodore up now. Like, everyone will tell you mad to put them on a racetrack.
But in the second year, I actually run second in that championship to Steve Williams, and I think it was by literally a point. It was very close.
Yeah.
So that was.
I think I
good.
covered all those races. Memory serves me right.
Yeah.
there.
So we moved on from that. So that would have been 87 and 88.
Yep.
Then in 89, actually no, in 88. John Cotter, my long-time co-driver and mate and best buddy, who was also my solicitor at the time, but he was involved in OLT licence days for people getting a licence, and I was. Yep. So we'd sort of become friendly, and as you do, you know, with total blindness, we got talking one day, and it probably involved a beer, or in Cotter's case, a bottle of red. And we decided it'd be a great idea to, in 88, to run a car at Bathurst in the 1,000k race, because really it couldn't be that hard. Because a lot of people were doing it.
Yeah. Couldn't be that
hard. So John was an old Alfa Romeo man, as you might well know.
Yep.
He'd put a deal together to run the ex-Colin Bond 75 at Bathurst, because it was actually out at Alfa Romeo sitting in their warehouse not doing anything, along with all the spare parts. So I don't know what happened with Bondi. Perhaps, I imagine, you know, that the deal stopped or whatever, and it all went back to Alfa Romeo, but it was just sitting there in a corner. So John had put a deal together to run the car at Bathurst, and I can't remember why, but literally at the last minute it all fell through, and we were a bit disappointed about that, because we got excited.
Be hard.
We're going to go to Bathurst.
One, it couldn't be hard, and two, we might as well just rock up to Bathurst and have a run and win it, right?
Yeah.
So,
see, simple.
What's the problem, you know?
If that bloke Brock can win a few, surely we can.
He didn't look like he was trying that hard. So we're really disappointed about that. And the following year, again, and I don't know if, I suppose just because you're involved and you know people and you hear stuff, but there was this thing going on, and I don't know the story, with the BMWs, the M3s, literally the ex-Brock cars. But apparently how it worked was that BMW owned all the cars, but Brocky had owned all the spare parts. And they kind of both took their bat and ball and gone home with it. So we had this like whole race team that was owned by two people, and there was a bit of a standoff and a stalemate, and I don't really know the story, but we got onto this guy, somebody knew somebody, and I'm hopeless on names, I can't remember. Super duper guy. He was the financial controller at BMW Australia. He ended up being the dealer.
Ron Meacham or something like that,
well, Ronnie got involved afterwards, but it wasn't, and he ended up being the dealer principal at BMW Sydney. Somebody will know that. But nice fella, and we negotiated a deal with him to buy two of the cars. And we'd been talking to Brock as well, and he was willing to help us and sell some stuff to us. In fact, Alan Gow, who worked for Brock at that time. So we wandered down to BMW in Waterloo, and they took us down into the bowels, and I think there were 5 or 6 of these M3s sitting there, and they just said, take your pick. Take whichever two you want. And I said, well, what's the deal, you know? And they went, we don't know anything about them. They're just stored here. So we can't tell you whose car's what, da-da-da.
So were they in the mobile colour still at the time?
Yep.
And what were the others?
Actually, no, they were in the mobile colour, sorry.
And what were the other 3? What were they in?
I think they were all mobile. I think
all
mobile.
5 of them?
All
or was
mobile.
there a black one or 2?
I don't think there was a black one, no, because when they went from Frank's team, Gardner's team, over to Brock's team, I think all the cars went, and I don't know the whole story, so I might be talking a bit bit of BS there, but
so
they were all white.
Were they possibly as a couple of them were show cars rather than race cars?
No, they were all race cars.
Wow.
Somehow BMW must have got back all the cars that Frank had.
Yep.
Well, I suppose BMW owned them. Frank
Putting
never
them
did.
under BMW dealership.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
And on the bottom floor, literally. No, the story gets worse because we sort of dug around as much as we could and got what we thought were the two youngest cars. No, that's true or not. But anyway, that's what we thought we got. But the other three cars wandered off and become art cars.
Oh,
and
okay.
they'd literally been driven off the track with the set of tyres on them, with the set of brake pads, with the fuel in them, and that's how they all were. And the other three toddled off, and one became a Michael Giacomara Aboriginal car, you might recall. One became the Kendone car with all the
Kendone
funny colours on it, and the other one become another art car, which I guess is still floating around the world somewhere as pieces of art, which probably
Also, they didn't make their way back to the BMW museum after that. Because, like, I know the BMW, I've been to the museum and they've got a couple of the old art cars and stuff.
There.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah.
And they say they've got more, like, stored because, of course, they can't put everything on show.
Correct.
But if they haven't got those three back, it'd be like,
No, I believe
where
they've
are they?
got them all.
Oh, they do. Okay.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
think there's even some 6 Series cars that were art cars.
So the art car collection, I don't actually know how many cars in it, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's quite a lot. And they do just ship them around the world from time to time. But somewhere in Munich, yes, there is a shed. And I went to the museum myself in 18.
Yeah.
And they actually said that whilst they've got the old factory, which is kind of their private collection, they do have another shed somewhere with hundreds of cars in it.
Wow.
Because they'd started, I don't know when it was, but quite a while back, I think they told me, keeping the first of every model ever produced and the last of every model ever produced.
Yeah.
And so they've literally got hundreds and hundreds of cars now.
Insane.
So,
So you picked the two you thought were the best?
The two cars.
But you know as well with those two cars, like, I guess they didn't, because they didn't know the history, so you didn't know whose car it was. And
we did try to dig around a little bit with some of the other competitors, you know, Tony Longhurst and back in the day. And back then I didn't know.
They have a logbook with them?
You had a logbook? Yeah, they're ready to go.
Yeah, but
so you could see the history of
the cars.
What had happened with those cars were, though, that you'd had Jim, Brock and Crompton driving them. And the thing we did discover was at any one time you couldn't go and get Peter Brock's car because he'd probably driven them all over the year.
Yeah.
Same as Jim had driven them all.
Yeah.
And
Crompo
had driven them all over the year as well. So there was a lot of confusion about whose car. The only thing we knew at the time was that the grills were painted different colours.
Yes.
And that was basically so that teams could
identify
them
on track.
And typically, Crompo, I think, had a white grill. Jimmy had the black grill, and Rocky always had the red grill.
Yeah.
But I think they just screwed them in and out as they were going. You know?
Yeah.
If Brock changed cars, then they'd change the grill, wouldn't they?
Yeah. And probably the logbook, but that's another story.
We're not talking big bangers at the moment, are we?
So
it's a little later in the...
No, that was
earlier. And then
I mean, in the podcast.
the other part of the story, which probably should be told, is that, and it's just amazing, and I can tell you a dozen of these stories about people who have helped us and they never get any credit for it. A little aside, Frank Gardner, the most generous, best, amazing human being you could ever ask to know. I'm very, very sad that I didn't get to know him a lot better back when we first run the cars. He was always sort of in the background, always offered a bit of advice, but there's probably a period of 4 years where we weren't the world's best mates, not for any particular reason, but I wish we had been because I could have learned so much more from him. Probably one of the most amazing motor racing people ever in Australia, in my view.
It's funny, sorry to interrupt you there, but Bob Tweedy got hold of a Formula 2 Honda-powered race car, right, and restored it. And he had an open day up at Hornsby, and Frank came down from Queensland to be there for the launch. And we're just standing there looking at it. It was a car that Brabham raced in Formula 2 events in Japan and other places around the world. And the first thing he said was, the three of us were standing there, and Rob said, yeah, we've just about got everything done on it now. We've just got to do a wheel alignment. Yeah, 3 degrees on the front and none on the back. That's freaks.
Yeah.
And another instance, we were at a Grand Prix not long before he passed away, and a few years ago, and the international media centre was within the Formula 1 paddock, but the national one was the cafe. That was it. So you had to sit there. And Frank came in and he sat down on the table with me and a guy by the name of Alan Edwards, who's a former editor of Auto Action, now runs V8 Extra. And he sat down and just started chatting to us like he knew us. And he said, you know what, this Alzheimer's, I'm not a fan. He told us about this instance with, Sir Jack Brabham was still alive, because they had Dr. Michael Henderson had this safety talk the day before at a Cam's lunch, talking about the banana effect in Formula cars, you know, when we had the 6-point harness introduced, and why it was introduced and all the rest of it. But he was telling a joke to Sir Jack, and it had a few swear words in it, and Lady Margaret, who was Sir Jack's wife, overheard a bit of it and was very shocked. And he said, I wasn't sure whether he was shocked about the fact that it had swear words in it or the fact that Jack laughed at it. Anyway, sorry, to go back to your story.
Yeah, so Frank was just one of the guys that helped us no end, but it was an aside for me as well. We then, I went down to Melbourne to Brocky's workshop, and Alan Gow picked me up from the airport, and we sort of went out, and by then they'd moved on to the Sierras, so they had all the BMW stuff packed along the wall. It was just, you know, stuff they wanted to get rid of. And I was like a kid in a candy shop, a bit like being back at your old man's workshop. And, you know, there's wheels and tyres and engines and gearboxes and, you know, rear ends and diffs and you name it, you know. And I'm sort of going along, and back at the time I said to Alan, I said, mate, look, we got 20 grand. Like, that's it, you know. And so there's this brand spanking new engine there in a crate, you know. And I said, oh, you know, literally at the candy shop, yeah, how much is the engine? And he said, oh, Pete, he said, you can't afford that. He said, we've got to get 50K for that. Yeah. And it's like, well, and then I need more than a spare engine. Yeah. So I picked out, you know, I'll have 4 sets of wheels and, you know, 1 diff and 1 gearbox and blah, blah, blah. And what about this engine here with the head off it, you know, and the hole in the piston? He goes, oh, you can have that, you know. It was sort of complete, but pulled apart with a hole in the piston. Anyway, went along and spent me 20 grand, you know. And I got onto a mate of mine who was at the freight business, and which reminds me of another funny story about Toll, Paul Little. Anyway, I rang him up and I said, mate, I've got 2 pallets of stuff at Brock's in Melbourne. I need to brought up to Sydney. You know, is any chance? Hey, mate, done. Don't worry about it. So sent the truck out, you know, a couple of days later, and I get a phone call. He goes, Pete, there's 2 pallets we've got to pick up. I said, yeah, everything okay? He goes, yeah, there is a problem. And I said, what's the problem? He said, it's not 2 pallets. And I said, what do you mean? I said, it wouldn't be much more. He goes, there's 8 pallets here. And I went, what? And he said, there's 8 pallets here for us, all wrapped up, ready for us to take. And anyway, back in those days, Mort was team manager, you know. So I rang Mort and I said, oh, I'm confused, mate. He said, I don't want any of that crap. It's all going. So long story short, they just bundled it all up. I think the only thing they kept was the brand new engine.
I was going to say, yes. The only bit you really wanted.
And the rest of it turned up, and it was 8 pallets, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, we don't want this crap here, you know. Like there was administration on one hand, and then there was the blokes in the workshop. It's like, get rid of it.
We need the space. Yeah.
None of that'll fit on a Sierra. Get rid of it.
And the stuff we got, you know, it's like 20 sets of new pistons, Marl pistons. I think when we were running, we had to do a bit of rebuild and shuffling, but I think at the time in our rotation we had 4 motors, 5 gearboxes, 5 diffs, We had suspension struts, you know, it went on forever, the stuff we had. But the irony of that story was about a month or so later, after that had all arrived, I got a call from Mort, and he said, Pete, you know the little diff pumps that, you know, the belt driven on the back? And I said, yeah. He said, did I send you any of them in that stuff? And I said, yeah, mate, I think there's about 4 or 5 of them. He goes, any chance you could send me one back? I said, mate, definitely.
Not a problem. We'll help you out.
So, you know, again, like, you know, the stories of people helping you, you know,
Yeah.
that just helped us no end. And, you know, that's, you know, Graham Brown, Mort, you know, just being a generous guy. And, I mean, clearly Brock knew we got it, and clearly Alan Gow knew we got it. And, you know, they're just such great guys, you know.
So did you buy the cars with a deal that they then had to go back to BMW at the end, or were they
we totally owned them.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And, in fact, when you say buy, we leased them.
Oh, okay.
So we didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So we leased them, and I think this will make a few people turn in their grave. I think we paid 60 grand each for them.
Yep.
I think it was 120 grand.
Yeah, wow.
2 cars.
For 2 cars. In perspective, it was in 1989.
Yeah.
It was a lot of money back then, but back at that time, a good mate of ours, Bob McDonald, who's still a very close friend, a good mate, and we still race with him, with Simon. He was working at a bank, and he very fortunately organised basically a car lease on them.
Yeah.
Which, you know, all went through, and there's no dramas, etc., etc. Although the funny side to it was, I think it was like a 3-year lease or something we had. Each year, this nice young girl from the bank would ring me up and go, just ringing up to check, we don't seem to have the registration number of that car you have leased from us on file. I'm just wondering if you give it to me. It's like, oh yeah, that'd be, you know, XYZ 1, 2, 3, 4. They had no idea it was a race car because it had just gone through as a car
they
lease.
race on the road. We go to Adelaide. And we go, fantastic. One of the things that I think is really cool about that period as well is, like, you ran those cars for a couple of years and had some pretty good success with them, but, like, what you were achieving with them actually led to BMW getting back in touch with you to find out what you were doing to be able to tune up their cars overseas, which was pretty interesting to see for a bunch of, you know, guys just going around as a family and you know, privateer racing.
Yeah, that's true actually. So we got the cars in '89 and we ran them till '94, so 5 years. But in '93, we changed. They were 2.3 litre cars, which run under the 2 litre, and of course then there was the 2.5 litre cars, which Tony and Alan Jones and those guys ran at the same time.
Which had the bigger wing on
the
back
bigger
of
wing,
them.
the Evo.
Yep.
But then in '93, Australia split and decided to have a 2 litre category and a 5 litre category. So we thought, well, you know, here we go. So we had to convert our 2.3 litre engines to 2 litre, and whilst we had a good chassis and a good basis, you know, where do you come up with a motor? So we had various iterations of that, and so then we become engine development specialists, where we were running engines on dynos and had many iterations of bore stroke configuration. We're principally still using the 2.3 litre engine, but we ended up...
Did you de-stroke it a little bit, or...?
Well, all of the above.
Yeah.
At the very first engine we built, we left the bore the same and de-stroked it. And, you know, it didn't have that much grunt up the top end. We fiddled around a lot on dyno. Then before that, we converted them to Autronic, again with probably a little bit of it. Not that we were heavily involved with Larry at the time, but he was using Autronic and it was good. And the guy, Richard Orbit, who was the brains behind Autronic, he was just, again, another superstar. He'd fly up from Melbourne, he'd help us do it, he showed us how to use it all. So, you know, in the end, and particularly with the engines, it was mostly Simon and myself. There were a lot of other people involved, but principally Simon and myself. At one stage, we were doing rotating shifts day and night. You know, I'd work through the night and machine everything up, and then Simon would work during the day, put it together. In the meantime, we were running a successful automotive business with 8 or 10 staff, somewhere in the middle of that. But I guess that was sort of irrelevant. But we built many iterations. When I say many, probably 5 or 6 iterations of that engine.
Yep.
And we ended up winning the championship that year, which was pretty cool.
And just for people who don't know, that was against the Toyotas, which were factory-back cars.
Yeah, they were a factory-back car, and they also had Caltech sponsorship, so it was a whole different story compared with what we had. But interestingly, because our championship started a lot earlier than Europe, and they'd gone to the same 2-litre formula in Europe, we were up to about our 3rd generation of that engine before they started, or before they really got cracking on it. And then we were sort of getting calls from BMW saying, well, hang on, you guys are leading the championship, you know, what did you do, you know, what bore stroke are you running, and et cetera, which we very gladly and happily shared with them. It was a little disappointing, I might say, when we got to the end, where we were starting to run out of puff a little bit, and the Toyotas were getting very quick, and we're having a little bit of trouble keeping up with them. We then asked BMW for some help and said, you know, can you just loan us one of your new engines, which had, you know, probably another 20 horsepower. And they weren't overly forthcoming with assistance, which was a tad disappointing. But
yeah,
was this at the time that the Super Touring was getting going as well, and so they had an interest in that?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So back in 93, I think worldwide, it was probably called 2-litre touring cars.
Yeah.
But to hot rod it a little bit and sound better, I think in about 94 or 95, I can't remember when, they just changed the name to Super Touring. But yes, it was exactly the same process. Yeah.
So their emphasis was more on that than what you were doing, running in the 2 litres with the 5 litres.
Well, yeah. See, that all changed too, because initially it was supposed to be 2 separate races.
Correct.
But you know, it didn't get off the ground enough in Australia, so they very quickly combined them back into the one race again.
Yep.
But you know, we did run at Emery Park in separate races.
Yep.
For the first round.
By Oran Park, that was the last round. I think you were in the one race.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. Yeah. And that was a titanic battle in the end between
I remember that,
Smithy and myself, because it was literally we were 1 point apart in the last round, and we'd been all over Australia.
Yeah.
You know, Wanneroo and Tasmania and anywhere you could find, you know, and it was,
It ended with some controversy, didn't it, that last race?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to put this delicately.
Bringing up some good yeah.
So, as I mentioned, you know, we'd got to the point where the Toyotas had just got quicker and quicker, and we were down a little bit on power. We're probably down about 20 horsepower, you know, 20 horsepower and 250 sort of thing. You know, so...
It's a fair bit.
Yeah, it's enough. And through that race, just Smithy's car was just a bit quicker. You know, initially we were together. You could throw a blanket over us for the first half of the race, but you know, I was just using tyres like crazy to stay with him, and then we started to separate a bit, but. Coincidentally, there was a bit of an incident which was investigated by all the appropriate authorities and everybody else, and decided it was just a simple racing incident. But it turned out that it was between John Cotter, who was my teammate, and Johnny Smith, who's an awesome human being, I should add. Yep. And it was a bit controversial at the time, and there was a fair bit of yelling and screaming, but
there was, yes.
Anyway, that's what it
life,
is.
That's what happened. But as you said, there was no blame apportioned to either side, and life went on.
Yeah.